It's very rare to see a good number of Latino journalists. So the lack of representation is our biggest challenge as far as the New England region.
You don't see very much investigation into these communities. There's a feeling of, I can't speak the language, so I'm not going to go in there. Language representation is a huge, huge issue.
I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Quick reminder, on March 29th, we'll be hosting a free, open to the public, 30-minute skills session on how to respond to a subpoena. This is an increasingly concerning issue that's been facing a lot of newsrooms in the region. We're going to have Matt Byrne, who's a media attorney based in Burlington, Vermont. He's going to be sharing with us information about subpoenas, the legal authority they have, but most importantly, how you can best advocate for yourself and your newsroom if you do receive a subpoena. All the information you need regarding this course and how to register is online at nfac.org. It's at noon on March 29th. Please join us. I'm here today with Karina Cuevas and Kevin Adrade, both from the National Association for Hispanic Journalists, New England chapter. Karina serving as president, Kevin as vice president. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Karina, you're with Telemundo in Boston as well, where you spend most of your time. Kevin, you're a freelance journalist in Providence, both with interesting perspectives, not only on journalism, but the role of Latinos in the profession and many of the challenges that are being faced. So Karina, as head of the New England chapter of the the National Association for Hispanic Journalists, if you could tell us a little bit about the work of the organization, some of the programming that you have coming up, and some of your goals for the upcoming year.
So the NAHJ New England chapter is relatively new. We've been in existence for 3 years. It was dormant before that. We revived it again, and we're trying to create more programs, not just for our members, but also for students, and also help student chapters at different universities to start their own kind of programming. So recently we actually had a Q&A session about resume building and cover letter workshop with Emerson University students. So that was interesting. And coming up, we will have some other talks, hopefully with political reporters, and also about branching out from mainstream media, maybe starting your own journalism venture. But our goal right now is to increase membership and also get people interested in participating in a lot more of our programs. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it will be virtual. But hopefully in the future, we will get to meet everyone in person.
Excellent. And Kevin, what role do you play in the organization? What have you been doing recently?
So I'm vice president and Karina is the president of the group. We have hosted several events. The first one we hosted this year was a seminar with the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma out of Columbia University. That was rather well attended. And like Karina said, our main focus is hunting down people interested in speaking with us. We're in contact with several potential speakers, including some who were involved in recent, very large and traumatic events, which we will keep under wraps for the moment until we have things concretely arranged.
I'm glad to hear that you were working with the DART Center and really tackling the issue of trauma in journalism, particularly during the last year and everything that journalists have faced from, just dealing with the pandemic generally and reporting in these circumstances during a public health crisis, to also, the risks and dangers that come with reporting on the many protests and assemblies, political assemblies that have occurred over the last year or so. Karina, maybe if you could tell us about some of the challenges specifically facing Latino journalists that other journalists may not be aware of or could use some insight on.
So one of the main things that I've noticed in New England is the actual lack of Latino journalists in mainstream media. I work for Telemundo, so clearly we do have Latino journalists, Spanish speakers that work here. But as far as other stations, other publications, it's very rare to see a good number of Latino journalists. So the lack of representation is our biggest challenge as far as the New England region. And I think that goes also nationally, depending also on the market. But aside from that, it's also the lack of representation from Black Latinos, which is something that a lot of people don't take into consideration. There are so many Black Latinos, and a lot of the times they're pushed to the side, maybe because they think they're not Latino looking enough, which is a problem for television. Television news is a lot about your looks. And it's something that really needs to change in the industry in general. But I think the main thing is just the lack of Latino presence in newsrooms. A lot of the times the Latino journalists that we do have most of the time cover immigration stories or stories that just focus on a specific subset of the Latino population, when it's so much more than that. I'm a first generation American, and clearly, yes, I care about immigration, but I think a lot of it also has to do with, let's focus on the economy. How is this going to affect Latinos, first generation, second generation? How are these first generation Americans going to help their parents as far as education, health insurance? Everything that matters within mainstream media also matters to the Latino population, but we're not covering the same kind of news as we should be.
And what are, Kevin, you and I, we discussed this previously, the lack of representation, specifically, in and around Providence, where you are. What are the consequences of this lack of representation? What does that look like for those outside of the newsroom when you're a part of a community and you don't see anybody on an evening newscast, for example, that looks like you? What's the concern there?
It results in an alienation. We've been seeing that happen for various different factors in the newspaper industry for the last couple of decades. Granted, digitization has been a huge factor there, but there's also a question of, does this news really reflect what we live with? When I first started at the Providence Journal, there were several occasions when I'd be speaking with people in the city's very large Dominican community, and they would say, what is the Providence Journal? There wasn't, it would be unfair to say there was no coverage, but there wasn't very much of an active presence of that news organization. And when there was a presence from especially the TV organizations, it would tend to be somebody was shot on Broad Street. And there was a fire over on Potter's Ave or Douglas Ave. Take your pick of the Providence Street. So those stories, they're important, but they also tend not to be very high impact. You don't see very much investigation into these communities. There's a feeling of, I can't speak the language, so I'm not going to go in there. Language representation is a huge, huge issue, not just in Providence, but in many different markets. Rhode Island has the largest or second largest proportion of Portuguese speaking groups in its population. 10% of the population is either Portuguese or Cape Verdean. And as of right now, to my knowledge, I am the only fluent Portuguese speaker working for the mainstream news here. And in terms of Spanish, where you have large populations of Dominicans, Colombians, Guatemalans, etc. There's Michelle San Miguel over at the Public's at Rhode Island PBS. There's me, and I believe that's it for Spanish representation. I could be wrong, and I could be missing some people, but that's not very good. And if you want to see the effects of that, go to a Facebook comments page. I remember covering a story about a shooting in Providence where the mayor is Jorge Elorza, this child of Guatemalan immigrants. And somebody who, when I visited their Facebook profile, said they were from the suburbs, said, what do you expect when the mayor's turning the city into little Guatemala? Which there's a whole bunch of layers of wrong there. So you get the painting of perceptions of a location that really distort what it's all about. The south side of Providence is a beautiful place There's good architecture there. There's good cultural activities. There's tons of good food. Karina and I have been to La Gran Parada on multiple occasions. And it's unfortunately undermined by the lack of representation of people from those communities.
So what can we do? What can newsrooms do to remedy this problem? Karina, maybe through the NAHJ or through your own, individual efforts, at Telemundo, what can newsrooms throughout New England do to make sure there's better representation and that these issues are getting the coverage that they deserve?
I think it really starts with management. We need to diversify management. If you look at newsrooms across New England and, across the country, mostly, it's majority white. Most of the supervisors tend to be white, tend to be either suburbanites or, people who did go to an Ivy League school. And I did go to an Ivy League school. I have a master's from Columbia, not saying that I want to be a supervisor because it's a lot of work, but, it's this perception that only a certain type of people fit that mold to become supervisors. And that's what's been happening throughout decades. That's why we don't see an advancement in diversity within management. And that's where it has to change. So one of the things that, NAHJ did together with Unify, which is a coalition made up of different associations of journalists of color throughout New England, was send a letter to newsrooms across New England about, how much diversity does your newsroom actually really have? How can we help advance that? And what are the steps that you're taking to change that? We didn't really get a lot of response, which, unfortunately, it's not surprising. But at the same time, these are the conversations that we need to have. White managers need to realize that unless you diversify your newsroom, you will not get the quality journalism that truly reflects your population. We can continue just covering, for example, in Massachusetts, only the Cape Cod beat. How many Black Latinos and Asians really live in Cape Cod? Not many. It is important. I'm not saying it's not, but we really need to start paying attention, not just to the crimes within our communities, but to things that really do matter. Again, economy, healthcare, immigration issue. When I'm talking about immigration, I'm not just talking about the path to citizenship. That's not the only immigration issue that's at stake. Education. So many of our communities have children. What about education? What about funding those schools? So these are the things that have to happen, but only if we diversify management. Once that happens, then we'll start seeing a change within employees in the newsrooms.
Yeah, I think one challenge going to what you're saying, Karina, is that it's very difficult, I think, to explain to people the news that they're not getting, right? Because of the lack, it's hard to show these are the stories that you're not hearing. What other types of stories or coverage do you see not being provided? Like, can you describe for us, those specific storylines, angles that we're not hearing about because we don't have the representation, we don't have the coverage of these communities, and we're not going to be hearing about these stories until we do. What do those stories look like?
One of the things lately that's been happening with the pandemic, it's the issue of transportation. We hear about transportation, people who are driving, how are the roads looking, if you're flying out somewhere. But we really need to take a look at public transportation. How does that look like for our communities? Mostly communities of colors use public transportation. We only focus on that when, they're changing a route or they're upgrading the green line or the red line. We need to talk about how these people are getting to their jobs, how long their commutes are. Why is it so long? Why is it taking so much to actually fund this? Why are they cutting services in communities that need them the most? So these are things that we see once in a while, but not constantly. Other news. I've been seeing a lot, and unfortunately, something that we have also covered is the fact that Latinos and African Americans are hesitant to obtain the vaccine. It's not about hesitancy. It's not, most of our communities are open to that. It's the lack of resources to get those vaccines to the communities that need them the most. So when we press someone about that, it could be the government, it could be the governor, it could be state representative. They're like, oh, it's just people are a little bit hesitant, the history. It's not about that. Again, it's about the lack of resources that goes into the community. So we focus on things that we already know instead of looking for the things that are actually happening to people at the moment. We know there's a history with vaccines in this country and communities of color. Can we move past that? Can we look at the resources? Can we look at why they're not getting the amount of vaccines that they need? Can we look at also how the health plays into getting a vaccine? A lot of people are like, oh, maybe because they're diabetic. Do we know why? Maybe they have a food desert in their community, and it's something that we don't really talk about. Maybe that's why they have some sort of comorbidity. These are the things that once you start talking about them, they start snowballing. But a lot of people don't want to tackle them because they feel it's too complicated, when in reality, it's not. It's just a matter of accessing the community, talking to its residents, and writing about it.
What are you seeing, Kevin, in Providence specifically? What types of stories just aren't being covered? What are we
honestly, it's along the same lines as what Karina is talking about. There's a lot. I'd even go so far as to say that it's very important to make sure that you include the leadership, the mayors, the governors, the representatives. But there's not a lot of community-centered reporting happening. And I'm not just speaking about Providence exclusively, I'm talking in general. Instead of going to the communities and hunting these stories, you're finding people just waiting for President Biden to make some type of sort of adjustment to immigration policy. And that's when they send somebody out to those communities to add that person as an addendum to the policy story, which those stories are necessary, but without having some form of focus on the people directly affected, that's once again going to fall right back into alienation. And going to a point you raised earlier regarding how to increase representation within newsrooms, I remember giving career day presentations in high schools, and students would say, I'm really interested in this career, it's really exciting, but the pay doesn't look that great, and I'm going to have to help my family out. We don't make that much money. There needs to be some type of acknowledgement and some type of schema to help people from these disadvantaged communities get into the industry. And frankly, that's not there in the scale that's needed right now.
Well, I know the three of us have discussed working together, NEFAC and NAHJ, to address some of these issues. Are there any things that members of the community can do to reach out to specific newsrooms and say, hey, we need more coverage of things that are relevant to our lives and to us? We need more representation. Any suggestions you'd give to those watching this?
So two things that pop to mind right away. One, the temptation's there, but going on a social media mob is going to do more to turn the journalist off to the reporting than anything, especially if you're launching personal attacks. So I'd advise avoiding that. Instead, I would advocate for going to the publication or news outlets contacts page and finding the reporter to the beat that's relevant and contacting that person directly, be that via phone, be that via email. Contact the editors, try and encourage them to go on community tours. Oftentimes the invitation is what's going to make someone go out somewhere, which is difficult depending on a person's level of anxiety around COVID at this moment, but it's still possible. I'm seeing several groups online do organize virtual tours of museums, cities, and things like that. So it's not impossible.
Any suggestions you would offer?
Yeah, I would definitely add, invest in your local publications.
Mhm.
It's very, very important. Television is just a small market compared to local publications. And I'm talking about print and digital. You know, the population that watches television, it is a little bit older population, but a lot of younger generations are really looking into digital and print publications. And a lot of people might say print is dying. A lot of it is switching over to digital. So I think investing in that, you know, it is hard for people who have to work 2 and 3 jobs to pay to read something. And that's one of the biggest concerns, you know, with a lot of our viewers. But it is important if we want to continue seeing the kind of coverage in our communities that we need to actually really invest in the local publications. As far as television, you know, we get calls, we get emails. Again, like Kevin said, if you see one of our reporters, you know, you can approach them within 6 feet distance, of course, but let them know, hey, this is what I do. Give them your card or give them your phone number. Let them know that you are present in the community, because oftentimes we tend to rely on the people that we are always talking to for the same stories, or, you know, it can be the one immigration story or several, but we always talk to the same people. We need to change that. We need to talk to other organizations. And if you have that possibility, send an email, contact the reporter, call the producers. You know, a lot of us, you know, as a producer, we take a lot of phone calls. We talk to the community. Let us know what's going on. You know, we look at the Facebook pages as well. If there's something that interests us, send us, you know, a Facebook message. So just reaching out and really supporting your local publications, I think is going to help in the long run.
Great guidance. And as we wrap up here, if anyone wants to reach out to the two of you to learn more about your work or about the NAHJ specifically, how's the best way to do so?
You can reach us on our Facebook page, NAHJ New England. It's the easiest way, or also our email, which is NAHJ. It's new_England@NAHJ.org. So it's new_England@NAHJ.org. Any ideas, any suggestions, you know, any speakers that you like to see, or if somebody would like to speak to our members as well, we also welcome that. We're always checking the email and we're always checking the Facebook page. So it's a good way to reach any of us.
Great. Well, I appreciate all the work the two of you are doing. I hope this is the first of many conversations that we have about these issues, and look forward to helping make some progress on all of them with you. So thank you both again for the time and explaining some of the challenges that you're facing. And I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you so much, Justin.